Tonight on Perspectives. French President Emmanuel Macron says nuclear weapons will never be in the hands of Iran.
Not now, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, never.
A rousing 40-minute speech to US Congress marks day 3 of the French state visit. Israel's defence chief is in the United States for talks with Mattis and Bolton on Iran and Syria, amid fears Russia could supply defensive weapons to Assad. And you can never be too rich. Doesn't ring true with this robber on the run. What failed to turn heads in this costly blunder in Russia?
Thank you for joining us here on Perspectives. I'm Tracy Alexander. Well, if holding hands and kisses weren't enough to signal the strong bond between US President Trump and his French counterpart, the rousing speech by President Emmanuel Macron to Congress today might have sealed the deal. On day 3 of the French state visit to Washington, the French leader delivering a very well-received address. In the midst of differences of view around trade between the leaders, he urged the United States to reject nationalism. He also spoke about staying true to global ideals of cooperation in the face of terrorism. But of course, to a roar of applause, Macron made a promise regarding Iran. Here are some of the highlights.
Iran shall never possess any nuclear weapons. Not now, not in 5 years, not in 10 years, never. To protect our democracies, we have to fight against the ever-growing virus of fake news, which exposes our people to irrational fear and imaginary risk. In Syria, we work very closely together. After prohibited weapons were used against the population by the regime of Bashar al-Assad 2 weeks ago, the United States and France, together with the United Kingdom, acted to destroy chemical facilities and to restore the credibility of the international community. This action was one of the best evidence of this strong multilateralism.
And I24 News International Affairs correspondent Bianca Zanini joins me in studio for more. Bianca, now of course, while these were some of the highlights, one of the words that he seemed to use over and over again was multilateralism.
Absolutely. That was the main thread, the main red thread in his speech, the fight against isolationism. He talked about the illusion of nationalism. This was clearly a critique against Trump, but at the same time he made sure to also speak Trump's language. So we heard him mention fake news, and he spoke of strength, and he spoke of having to protect the freedom of these countries. And the way to do that, he said, was to work together, right? So he touched on issues of security. He talked about the threat of terror. He mentioned Syria. He mentioned Iran. He spoke about trade. He even warned that a trade war could hurt the United States middle class. He spoke of the climate. He said there's no planet B. That was very smart. And then he spoke of globalization. And throughout all of these points that were very different, he had one clear thread and one clear message, which is, doesn't matter the risk, we need to fight it together.
Right. Now, talking about your aside there, that was very smart. What is your read on how Macron actually played that Iran issue?
Well, look, he had to walk a very fine line here, right? Because on the one hand, he wanted to make it very clear that he knows that this is Trump's decision, right? He's going to decide that on his own. He said, whatever the president chooses, he repeated that again and again. And that's an important rhetoric because it shows respect, it shows humility. But on the other side, he also didn't plead, he didn't ask. He just said, listen, this is your right to decide, but if you leave the deal, this is what we're going to do. So Trump doesn't like weakness. He showed that he was also strong. And essentially, this was a strategy to, in the best case, get Trump on board with his suggestion to adding to the deal instead of leaving it. And if not that, then at least buy some time.
Right, well, at least it looks like the relationship is on the up. We'll wait and see how long this bromance actually lasts. Thanks, Bianca. All right, well, in just over 2 weeks' time, US President Trump could walk away from the Iran nuclear deal. Excuse me. But rhetoric around accepting a new deal seems to be featuring more and more. French President Macron has been on a charm offensive on his state visit to convince Trump not to scrap this landmark accord. Instead, he's proposing this solution: to build on the one currently in place together with Washington, based on 4 pillars. Now, the first, he says, is blocking Iran's nuclear activity in the short term, which exists in the current agreement until it, of course, begins to expire in 2025. The second pillar being stopping Iran's nuclear activity in the longer term. The third being halting Iran's ballistic missile program. And then fourth, pursuing political solutions to the conflicts in the region like Yemen, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, where Iran, of course, has significant influence. For more, I'm joined by Middle East and geopolitical analyst Matthew Brodsky. Matthew, always a pleasure to have you with us. Now, Trump saying Macron has a good idea of what he's going to do on May 12. So with these 4 pillars as they are, what do you make of that?
Yeah, I don't make too much of that because we know Trump likes to keep his cards close to his vest, and it depends who he's going to be speaking with over the next few weeks. Much can happen. What I do know for sure is that Trump has been leaning certainly toward getting out of the agreement, and he has had a team in place for months now who has been trying to work with Europe to come up with fixes to the current deal. That is, to fix what is currently there. What is being proposed right now is keeping the same flawed structure and to build on top of it. In some aspects, it kicks the can down the road, but according to what the president has been saying that he is looking for, and according to what most who support him have been looking for as far as fixes, it just simply is not enough. But again, with this president, it's really hard to tell till he actually makes something policy and acts on it.
Right. Now, but during an earlier meeting in the Oval Office, Trump said it would not be easy for Iran to restart its nuclear enrichment program. How does that stand up against Macron's statement that walking away from the deal is a bad idea?
Well, look, the European perspective is that they would like to make a lot of money working, doing economic deals with Iran, and they make hand over fist doing so. So the United States, by pulling out of the deal, would make that very difficult, if not impossible, for Europe and other nations to deal with Iran. So it's not in their interest, so they'll say whatever it is that they can say. I mean, granted, Iran doesn't tomorrow, if the United States pulls out of the deal, suddenly have a nuclear weapon. It still takes time for them to restart whatever they're doing. That takes time, of course, but it doesn't change the fact that there still would need to be a plan in place for how to deal with Iran. And right here, what could be happening is more sanctions, specifically on the central bank of Iran, because the real Iranian currency is just plummeting right now. People are protesting in the streets, and the United States, really, the perspective that we should be having is that the best way to ensure that there's no problem with Iran's nukes is if the regime were to fall. And that is a possibility that the United States should really be encouraging right now.
Very briefly, we have to go up for a break, but another part of this big deal is Syria. Now, Trump's saying he doesn't want to give Iran open access to the Mediterranean, but how does that stack up with bringing troops home soon?
Yeah, that's a balancing act. One perspective is that the United States power that it has in the region is not really with the 2,000 troops in Syria. It can do so from Qatar and its other air bases if it wants to, so its presence isn't necessary. But yes, that is a very valid point. Staying in Syria presents a problem for Assad and getting the oil that he has, where the United States is currently camped out on top of, and prevents the land bridge that Iran has coveted for so many years.
All right, Matthew Brodsky, appreciate that insight there. Well, now this conversation continues after the break with the Iranian perspective explained. Plus, later on Perspective, Israel's Prime Minister promises new opportunities to recover the Israeli civilians and bodies of soldiers being held by Hamas in Gaza. And Russia says it will supply defensive weapons to Syria without naming what kinds, as Israel's defense minister is in the United States to meet with its top security chiefs. Don't go anywhere.